If I had known what was waiting for us in that house, I would never have booked it. My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm 29 years old, and my girlfriend, Emily, is 27. Last fall, we decided to take a weekend trip to Asheville, North Carolina. We wanted to escape the city and spend a few days surrounded by nature. Instead of booking a hotel, we found a small, cozy cabin on Airbnb. It was a bit outside the city, deep in the woods, quiet and peaceful, or so it seemed. The reviews were all positive. The host, Mark, was friendly and reassuring in his messages. Everything seemed perfect. We arrived in the evening. The cabin looked exactly like the photos. Wooden beams, a stone fireplace, and a spacious deck. It felt secluded, but not unsafe. On the kitchen counter, there was a guest book where previous visitors had shared their experiences. Most of them mentioned how quiet and relaxing the place was. After unpacking, Emily decided to take a shower while I made us some drinks. But a few minutes later, she called out to me, "Danny, the shower's not working." I went to check and turned the faucet. No water. I tried the sink. Nothing. Then the kitchen sink. Still nothing. I messaged Mark on Airbnb. He responded quickly. "That's strange. There were no issues last week. Let me send my repair guy over. He should be there in about 30 minutes. That quick response reassured us. Exactly 30 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I found a tall, thin man in his 40s. He was wearing a faded gray work shirt and old jeans. His face was tired and pale, with sunken eyes. "You must be Daniel," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. I nodded. "Yeah, come in." Without a word, he stepped inside. He didn't introduce himself, didn't explain where he worked, and didn't even mention Mark. He just walked straight to the bathroom. Emily was sitting on the couch, watching him uneasily. There was something off about him. Cold, distant, unsettlingly quiet. He fiddled with the shower handle for a moment, then crouched down to check the pipes under the sink. I leaned against the doorway, watching him. "You work for Mark?" I asked casually. He hesitated slightly, then nodded. "Yeah." But something about his voice felt wrong. It sounded forced. A strange sense of unease crept over me. Without thinking, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, quickly sending Mark a message. "Your guy is here." "What's his name?" A minute passed. No reply. The man stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. "Looks like a pressure valve issue," he said. "I need to check the main water line outside." Before I could respond, he turned and walked quickly down the hall, opening the front door and stepping out. The moment the door closed behind him, my phone buzzed. Mark had finally responded. "What guy? I haven't sent anyone yet." A chill ran down my spine. I looked at Emily. She had seen the message too, and her face had gone pale. "We need to leave," I whispered. Without hesitation, Emily grabbed her bag. I crept to the window and carefully peeked outside. The man wasn't at the water line. He was standing by the trees, watching the cabin. He was completely still. But there was something else. In his hand, he was holding a knife. My heart pounded. I switched off the lights and motioned for Emily to follow me to the back door. We slipped outside as quietly as possible, then moved toward the woods. Just as we stepped onto the forest path, I heard the front door creak open. Then his voice rang out. "Where did you go?" He was toying with us. We ran. Branches snapped under our feet. The cold air burned my lungs, but we couldn't stop. He was coming. Then, suddenly, headlights appeared on the road ahead. A car was approaching the cabin. It was Mark. I ran straight into the road, waving my arms frantically. He slammed on the brakes, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. "What's going on?" he asked. "There's a man in the house," I panted. "He said you sent him, but you didn't. He has a knife." Mark's face darkened. He immediately pulled out his phone and called 911. The police arrived within 10 minutes. They searched the cabin and the surrounding woods, but the man was gone. The only trace of him was the muddy footprints he had left inside the house. But there was something even more disturbing. When the police checked the guest book near the entrance, they found a note scribbled at the bottom of the last page, written in shaky handwriting. I like watching them before they notice me. A sickening realization hit me. He hadn't just broken in tonight. He had been inside before we even arrived. I've always believed in preparing for the worst-case scenario, but sometimes, even when everything seems perfectly normal, you have no way of knowing what's coming. My name is James Holloway. I'm 34 years old. I work in finance, and I've lived a privileged life. I grew up in luxury, attended top schools, and always stayed in safe places. But last summer, I learned the hard way that money doesn't always buy security. At the time, work had been overwhelming, and I needed a break. I wanted to get away from the city and spend a few quiet days in nature. Rather than staying at a hotel, I rented a luxury cabin on Airbnb. It was tucked away deep in the Colorado mountains, isolated, surrounded by forest, the kind of place where no one would hear you scream. The view was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows surrounded the house, and there was a massive stone fireplace. The host, Tom, seemed friendly and attentive. He messaged me frequently, checking if I needed anything. "Everyone who stays here has an incredibly peaceful time. I hope you do too," he wrote. At first, he came across as a thoughtful, trustworthy host. When I arrived, I was blown away. The interior looked like something out of a high-end design magazine. Everything was modern and expensive. Marble countertops in the kitchen, custom furniture, a massive flat-screen TV. It didn't feel like a vacation rental. It felt like a billionaire's mountain retreat. My first night was peaceful. I had a few glasses of whiskey, read by the fire, and let the silence calm me. But on the second night, I saw the car. It was around 10 p.m. I was sitting by the fireplace, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed headlights cutting through the darkness. I looked outside. A police car. A strange unease settled over me. What were the police doing all the way out here? The car doors opened. 2 men stepped out. They wore black uniforms, badges, and had radios on their belts. They looked like real cops. They knocked on the door. Slowly, I got up and opened it. The shorter one, with sharp eyes and a rigid stance, looked me up and down. "Mr. Holloway?" he asked. "That's me," I said. The taller one stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Holloway, we're conducting an investigation in this area. We received a tip that a dangerous drug dealer might be hiding nearby. We need to take a quick look around your cabin." I frowned. "A drug dealer around here?" The short one shook his head. No, nothing like that. But given your presence here, we just need to ask you a few questions and do a routine check." I hesitated. Something felt off. But they were the police. What was I going to do? Refuse? "Of course," I said, stepping aside. As they entered, the short one pulled out a notepad and started questioning me. How long have you been here? 2 days. Have you ever visited this area before? No. Is anyone staying here with you? No, I'm alone. Meanwhile, the tall one silently moved through the cabin. He glanced into the kitchen, then pushed open the bedroom door. That struck me as odd. If they were searching for a fugitive, why was he checking inside my bag? I was about to say something when the short one's tone suddenly changed. I asked you some simple questions, Mr. Holloway, he said, his voice sharper now. Are you sure you're being honest with us? A cold wave of fear washed over me. This wasn't just routine questioning. What are you implying? I asked. The tall one suddenly lunged at me and shoved me to the floor. Bam! My head smacked against the corner of the coffee table. My vision blurred. Before I could react, one of them was rifling through my pockets. They pulled out my wallet, yanked my watch off my wrist, grabbed my phone, and smashed it against the wall. And in that moment, I realized the truth. They weren't cops. But by the time I understood, it was too late. They tied me to a chair and began ransacking the cabin. My laptop, my watch, my bag, my cash. They took everything. Eventually, the tall one walked back in and nodded. Let's go. Before leaving, the short one pulled a small plastic bag from his pocket and tossed it onto the floor. When the real cops show up, he said with a smirk, this'll be a fun little surprise for them. And then they were gone. For a long time, I just sat there, struggling to breathe. My hands trembled. They had been fakes. After they left, something caught my eye. A security camera. It was mounted just above the fireplace, but I hadn't put that camera there. Tom, the host, he had chosen me. From the very beginning, I had been a target. Hours later, the real police arrived. I told them everything, but they found nothing. And Tom, they questioned him, but he played dumb. What? I would never rent to people like that. That's terrifying. I'm so sorry this happened to you. But I knew. He had picked me. After the police finished their investigation, one of them turned to me. Mr. Holloway, these guys were professionals. They usually pick their targets in advance. My stomach dropped. My eyes drifted back to the camera above the fireplace. Was there a security camera in this house? I asked. One of the officers glanced around and shook his head. No, there are no cameras here. But I had seen it. The next day, I contacted Airbnb customer service. I explained everything, but they said they couldn't directly contact Tom. But I could. I opened the Airbnb message thread and wrote to him. Did the police question you? What do you think about what happened that night? A few hours later, he replied, yes, it's terrifying. I hope you're okay. The police told me you were really lucky. Those guys might have killed someone before. A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't told him what the police had said. How did he know that? Even as I write this, my skin crawls. I don't know if there's a logical explanation for what happened to us, but I do know one thing. I will never book an Airbnb again. If Lisa and I had stayed in that house just a little longer, I might not be here to tell this story. My name is Alex Carter. I'm 32 years old and work as a graphic designer. Last summer, my girlfriend Lisa and I decided to take a trip to a small town in West Virginia. We wanted to escape the stress of city life and spend a few days surrounded by nature. We found a secluded house on Airbnb deep in the woods. It looked perfect in the photos, modern, cozy, and well-maintained. The host, Richard had written in the description that he had inherited the house from his family and was renting it out since he no longer used it. The price was reasonable. What we didn't know was that renting that house would be the biggest mistake of our lives. We left late in the evening, and by the time we reached the outskirts of the town, the sky was completely dark. As we drove deeper into the forest, the roads became narrower, the trees denser, and houses less frequent. Finally, we reached the dirt road leading to the house. There were no streetlights, only the glow of our headlights illuminating the path. When we arrived, Lisa's face tightened with discomfort. The house that had looked so inviting in the photos now seemed abandoned. The curtains in the windows were stained, and the wooden steps of the porch appeared to be rotting. "This place, it's too quiet," Lisa whispered. She was right. There were no birds, no rustling leaves, nothing but an eerie silence. A strange unease settled in my stomach, but I shook it off and retrieved the key from the lockbox by the door. It was tangled in a thin web of spider silk. Lisa's voice trembled. "When was the last time someone stayed here?" A cold shiver ran down my spine, but it was too late to turn back. "Doesn't matter," I said, unlocking the door. As soon as we stepped inside, a stale, heavy odor filled our noses. It smelled like mold, old wood, and something else, something faint but sickening. The house looked exactly like the pictures, yet everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. The furniture, the kitchen counter, even the floor. When I touched them, my fingers came away coated in gray. Lisa wiped a hand across the table and frowned. "No one's cleaned this place in a long time." I tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe the owner had neglected to tidy up. Maybe the photos were outdated. "It's fine," I reassured her. "Let's just get some rest." Upstairs, there were 3 doors. One led to our bedroom, one to the bathroom, and the last one was locked. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Lisa stepped onto the landing behind me. "Is it stuck?" "No, just locked," I replied, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but then I heard it again. Slow, deliberate footsteps in the hallway. I sat up and strained my ears. The sound was coming from the direction of the locked door. Then the doorknob turned. Someone was trying to get out. The next morning I went downstairs and stopped dead in my tracks. The floor was covered in dust, but there was something off about it. Our footprints were there, but so were another set of tracks. I crouched down and looked closer. Yes, among our footprints, there was a second set, smaller, fainter, but clearly distinct. And they led from the front door to the locked room upstairs. Someone had been inside the house with us. But how? The doors were locked. Had someone come in while we were sleeping? I told Lisa, and her face went pale. "Alex, we need to leave. Now." But before we did, I needed to see where those footprints ended. I forced the locked door open, then my breath caught in my throat. The room was nearly empty. There was nothing but a rusty metal table and an old wooden chair. Yellowed newspapers and faded photographs were pinned to the walls. But the most disturbing thing was the wooden hatch in the middle of the floor. A name had been carved into the surface. Eleanor. Just as I reached for the hatch, a sound made my blood freeze. A muffled, ragged scream. It came from beneath the floor. I grabbed Lisa, and we ran. We didn't even stop to grab our bags. We jumped into the car and sped away. not looking back. The police didn't take us seriously at first, but a few hours later, I got a call. They had found a body. When they broke open the wooden hatch, they discovered a small, windowless basement, and inside it, a decomposing woman's corpse. She was Eleanor, a 26-year-old woman who had gone missing a month ago. But the most horrifying part, forensic analysis revealed that she had been dead for only a few weeks. That meant when we were there, Eleanor had still been alive, and the sound we had heard that night, it was her final scream. The police launched an investigation into the Airbnb host, but then something even more disturbing came to light. Richard, the supposed owner, told them, "I haven't rented that house in over 5 years. I shut down my Airbnb account," he insisted. "How did you even book it?" It turned out that the account that had rented us the house was fake. The person who had listed it, whoever had trapped Eleanor in that basement, had used stolen information to create the listing. And now, that person was still out there. After that night, Lisa and I never used Airbnb again. But sometimes I wonder, maybe that man is still doing the same thing somewhere else. Maybe, right now, he's setting up another fake listing. And maybe he's waiting for his next guest.